Okay, good morning everyone. My name's Patricia Montague. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the Director of the Superannuation and Investments business here at AMP and responsible for the AMP's retirement strategy. It's wonderful to see so many of you are here. Welcome, and welcome to our external guests, members of the media and our online community as well. Shakespeare famously wrote that all that glisters is not gold, and that's very appropriate for today at Amplify, because silver is the word of the day. We know people are changing the way that they're thinking about retirement and what their expectations of retirement are. It's fair to say across the world, governments, industry bodies and organisations are grappling with the challenges and the opportunities that are manifesting from the fact that we're all living longer, working longer and living healthier. So in Australia, we've just seen a first wave of baby boomers come through, and we're seeing a shift in what people consider retirement to be. Interestingly, we're predicted in Australia to have one of the longest life expectancies, which is great news, with the number of Australians aged 65 projected to more than double by 2055. The number of people between the ages of 15 and 64 for every person over 65 will fall from 4.5 today to 2.7 by that time. And interestingly, the proportion of the population participating in the labour force is also expected to decline as the community ages. So this presents both challenges and opportunities for companies like AMP, but mostly we are excited because these are the opportunities where we can help people live their best life, which is the heart of who we are. So today I am absolutely delighted to welcome Michael Hodin, who is the Executive Director of the Global Coalition of the Aging, a body which aims to reshape how global leaders approach and prepare for the 21st century shift in population ageing. Along with being the Executive Director of the Global Coalition on Ageing, Michael is a partner at the High Lantern Group, a thought leadership and issues management consultancy, and he's also a feature blogger at the Fiscal Times through the Age and Reason blog. He has an illustrious resume. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He sits on the boards of the Foreign Policy Association, the Business Council for International Understanding, the American Society on Ageing, Oxford University, Partners for a Living Community, and on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Ageing. So please join me this morning in welcoming Michael Hodin.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Delighted. Let me just get this set. It came off. Well, we're really thrilled to be here, and as I've met a number of you over the last day or so, perhaps I just open up not about aging or this demographic shift, but to comment for a moment about Amplify, because in the vernacular, I'm blown away. This is really spectacular. I was in the corporate world for many, many years, longer than anyone wants to know. I worked for Pfizer for many years, and the last few have been involved doing this aging demographic shift and the consultancy. And so I've seen a lot of how organizations, corporations attempt to try to enhance and enable learning and have innovation and disruption. And I have to tell you that Amplify is the most interesting model I've seen anywhere. You may think I'm just saying that, but it's true. So congratulations to everyone, and Annalee in particular. It's a pleasure to finally have met you, and congratulations to everything you're doing. So let's get started on this aging topic, and perhaps I can open up with what I will suggest is a key takeaway, and that is that I suggest you think about aging as a strategic lens through which to understand how to live life and manage society differently in the 21st century. So it's a strategic idea, a strategic lens, and we're observing everywhere from governments to corporations and individuals that it is recognized having impact, and how does it change? This should be turning. Okay. So the first point is, I suppose because we use the word aging, when we talk about this, everyone thinks about old. And while that is true, what this is really about is a demographic shift of the sort that we have never before seen in the history of humanity, in the history of the planet. And to really understand the implications and to really begin to absorb the implications, we have to think about it as life changing for all of us. Not just those of us today who may be 48 or 57 or 87, but for those who are being born and those who are not born yet. Nevertheless, if you Google the word, you will oftentimes see that it is only about the old. And yes, aging is about the old, but it is also, as I say, about a change in life course over the course of the 21st century as a consequence of this huge market trend which is disrupting everything. And so a main point is that we are all aging. I mean, that's very obvious in a sense. But the point about longevity, which is perhaps the most simple, but I believe very profound component, is that it does change everything. And as we'll get to in a few moments, I think in many ways the pillars of that being health and financial components. But if we were all going to die at 47 or 65, which was the case until recently, that takes you down one path. It takes you down one path with respect to what you need to live in the context of health. It takes you down one path with respect to the context of where you are on financial and life challenges. If you're going to live to 80, 90, and beyond, which is now where we are, everything changes. And so it's that extra 30 years or so, which we can say almost glibly, which has a profound impact. And these two pillars of health and financial are really critical. And they work both on the individual level and ought to work, although they're not yet kicking in, except for in minor cases, at the public policy, government, and global institutional level. And I'll talk about some of that. But these are some of the components that one thinks about. The Alzheimer's piece is one we're all very aware of. We've spoken and understood that as probably the greatest challenge we have in the 21st century. If we don't solve that, bluntly, we're sunk. Because Alzheimer's is not just a disease and therefore a health challenge. It's not just a social problem because of the character of the disease. It is becoming the fiscal nightmare of our 21st century. We simply cannot afford it because it is, as many of you will know, almost exclusively a function of aging. And as more and more of us become old, then that disease becomes a risk factor. I think many of you know it's roughly 2 to 1 post-85, which is quite stunning. But another component that you see up here is skin, which oftentimes we don't think about. Now, of course, there's melanoma. But as we age, until biology changes, and we may get to change that through stem cells and other genome scientific developments, which I'm actually confident we will, but at least for the next several decades, as we age, no matter who we are, our skin deteriorates, as our hearing deteriorates, as our vision deteriorates, as our bones deteriorate. And so if you're going to live to 58 or 62, it takes you down one place. If you're going to live to 80 or 90 or 100, it's a different place. And it's both with respect to the individual and corporate strategy. On the financial side, it also then begins to change. Because if we're going to be living into our 80s and 90s, the idea of finishing school at 18 or 21 or 22 and being done is a little hard to conceive when one could be working for another 50 or 60 years. But to back up a bit, it is the case that the data is very, very powerful. Whatever else we say about this megatrend of population aging, it is founded first and foremost on the data. Living longer. We all know that. You know that very well here in AMP. The extra, quote unquote, extra 30 years of life is quite stunning. And I think we've just gotten started. But there's also these low birth rates. And this is something that is not as fully appreciated in many places. So there are two kind of sort of concepts here to think about. One is aging as an individual, aging with respect to families and society around our longevity. But the other is as the political context of public policy, and that's around the aging of populations. So correlated almost perfectly over the last several decades with modernization and urbanization, country after country after country are experiencing this culture of low birth rates to the point where we are literally depopulating. The Japanese, who are more or less the canary in the mine shaft, as it were, have a birth rate of about 1.2. I have a friend who did a little sort of intellectual exercise. Things will change as our human capacity begins to respond to it. But he did an exercise with respect to the two oldest populations on the planet as a percent of old to young, Italy and Japan, both at about 1.2. And in another 350 years, if they continue to go at this rate, there will be 17 Japanese and 17 Italians. Yes. And even by 2020, the Japanese will have a society where they have close to 40% of their population over 60. So the arithmetic simply does not work if you try to keep 20th century institutions, 20th century public policy. Pensions, healthcare, financial matters, the arithmetic is just not there. As I'm sure many of you will know, and I've talked to some of you over the course of the 24 or 36 hours that I've been here, this magic age of 65 that we still use, you in Australia, of course, are beginning to change that, and you're really ahead of the game. I think you've now got 70, which will kick in over the next few years. But 65 is still sort of the symbol, the magic. That was picked by Bismarck in 1888, so not even the 20th century. And actually for a different reason. He was trying to get the other principalities of what became Germany to join. And he basically said, if you become part of what was going to become Germany, we will give you health and pension benefits. The average age was about 47, so when he picked 65, he knew he had 3 people that he had to pay out to. He could afford that. Again, we did a little bit of a mental exercise, and if you were to pick retirement today based on our longevity, it would be about 124, which we could afford. So the component of this low birth rate with respect to how society managed this is really, really critical. The Japanese, again, as many of you will know, and this is, we sort of get amused by some of these facts. This one is not amusing, but it is really dramatic. By 2020, the Japanese will sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. So, a society like that has to rethink and reimagine how it is organized. The key point here is that we will very, very shortly have more old than young. This has never before been seen on the history of the planet. And we can, in a sense, forgive ourselves for perhaps making some mistakes in this new era. I have a friend who just wrote a piece actually the other day where he was talking about the shift largely in what we now think of as Western democracies, of course including Australia, at the dawn of industrialization right about the turn of the 20th century. And at that time, one of the big shifts was the move of where you went with the children from rather being a child at 5, 6, 7, or 8 to basically going into the fields and working in agrarian societies. With the advent of industrial society, that completely changed, and we invented a whole new word, which we now call adolescence. We haven't yet invented the word that will describe our period of life from, let's say, 50 to 100. And until we invent a word and understand the symbolism around that, it's even hard to understand how to get from here to there. Standard & Poor's a couple of years ago did this global aging report in 2010, and they basically said this is the most massive and irreversible phenomena that we have seen, and you should pay attention to this. They were writing for, in their category, sovereigns. So this is a huge tsunami. It is one that is beginning to get noticed by global leaders, by global institutions. Put a couple up here. The World Economic Forum has some documents around it now. The OECD. There's a commissioner from the EU. I find it, in a way, more interesting when you sort of begin to survey the media and the communications environment. Yesterday, there were a lot of very interesting sessions about the social employee and the degree to which we are democratizing, all that we do. And so when you look at, I keep pointing, by the way, because I have slides up here. When you look at, from the Wall Street Journal to Time Magazine, The Economist, you're beginning to get people really pay attention to it. I'll come to it later, but there's one sort of at the bottom which to me is even more interesting than others, and it's Women's Wear Daily. Now, we understand that the health industry is focused on aging. We understand that AMP and your colleagues in financial services are focused on aging. When Women's Wear Daily dedicates an entire edition where it opened up and basically said to fashion designers, you don't pay attention to this huge growing boomer market that they judge at about 20 to 25 billion. I think it's actually much higher. I think they were just talking about the United States. You're crazy. And it is at your peril that you miss it. So there's a market opportunity here. Global endorsements around the world, you're seeing a great deal of attention. One of our friends at the Global Coalition and colleague who's here, Martin Warner, I think you're here somewhere, but with Home Instead Senior Care, and he was telling me that there's now, just in the last few days, a change in caregiving in the Australian government. And very, very innovative, very, very interesting, as I alluded already, and you know better than me, change in retirement age. There aren't very many, and particularly in Europe, who are insisting on trying to keep it the way it was in the 20th century. It just will not work. We created this Global Coalition on Aging, in which we are proud and delighted to have AMP as a member. We have a series of advisors from around the world. The chair of it is Baroness Sally Greengross, who kind of invented this stuff in the UK in many ways 3-4 decades ago, and is one of the leaders of the International Longevity Center. You'll hear from a colleague and a friend, Ruth Finkelstein, later. I don't know if Ruth is in the audience now, but among the things Ruth is doing is at the International Longevity Center based in New York. And the model of the Global Coalition, which again is, for purposes today, to suggest to you that this is a reflection of this topic being picked up by global brands across the world. The Global Coalition model is to have 15 or 20 companies cross-sector, but when you get the likes of AMP, GE, BlackRock, Intel, Pfizer, Novartis, to pick a few, you begin to get an understanding that this thing of aging, this trend, is getting picked up, and by virtue of our collection, our coalition coming together, we can go into the OECD or into the WHO or work with the World Bank or national governments and begin to talk about the changes that need to take place to align to what is already happening in the marketplace. So how do we execute on this thing we're calling aging? And as I've already been, I hope, suggesting, it's really at two levels. One is the individual, and the other is public policy. And the corporation, the visionary, the leader corporations are really the center of this, particularly global corporations, where they can both design strategies and enable a change in the marketplace, benefit themselves, their customers, their stockholders, their shareholders, their stakeholders. In other words, win-win-win, but also, by virtue of that, suggest changes in the public policy agenda. Patricia already alluded to this, that we're about an opportunity, an economic opportunity. I'm sure you all know this guy, pretty interesting. Age seems not to have any impact on his entrepreneurship and excitement. In the U.S., about 23% of entrepreneurs in the data we have were age 55 to 64. We're positive that number has grown, and it's at the cutting edge of opportunity. Here in Australia, this is quite stunning. Maybe it's the reason that your government is beginning to take notice. 80% of all labor market growth by 2016. Another number, back to the U.S., that within the next 2 years, which is to say tomorrow, 70% of American disposable income will be held by people 60 and over. Any sector that doesn't pay attention to this is crazy. As a matter of commercial strategic opportunity, as a matter of workplace and workforce changes, and as a matter of social sustainable responsibility with respect to the changing society. Japan, which I've already alluded to, and obviously is in a particularly difficult place society-wise, has a number of very interesting developments. Their company Aeon has been moving in this space and are designing malls that are age-friendly and designed in their marketing to attend to this opportunity. At the EU, which has a whole set of challenges around the public policy, they have at least rhetorically recognized that if they're going to achieve growth by 2020, which is one of their goals, that part of it has to be based on innovation and entrepreneurship for a healthier and more active aging. Because the data, as I alluded to, I mentioned Italy, but it's not dissimilar in Spain, in the UK, in Germany, virtually all across Europe, and including in many of the newer markets in Europe. I love to go to fashion and Hollywood, and because I think that when you begin to get them paying attention to this topic, you begin to get a kind of consumer interest. I mentioned this Women's Wear Daily component, which we did a blog not too long ago about the opportunities in wearables, and suggested that why doesn't Calvin Klein design a T-shirt with the ability to monitor one's heart rate and go right back to the Cleveland Clinic. They're actually now, not Calvin Klein, but others are actually looking at that. We're barely scratching the surface on this opportunity. And I don't know if Elizabeth is in the room. You might have met her already, but there's a lot of great work being done. If you haven't seen it, I recommend one of the latest movies, which is Best Marigold Hotel, and Best Marigold Hotel 2 is even more interesting. So I'm suggesting we're just getting started. As a member of this World Economic Forum that Patricia alluded to, it's basically virtual think tanks that they have, and there is one on aging. And a couple of years ago, a few of us got together and said, let's create a framework of age-friendly principles for the corporate world and design them in a way that are notional. So it's not something that you would be legally responsible to, quite the reverse. But it would be about flexible working. It would be about flexible work and retirement. It would be about caregiving as a major opportunity, etc. This is now beginning to take off. We're just in the marketplace now with inviting companies to join. The model is the environment or sustainable the sustainable movement where now virtually everyone feels they have to sort of sign on to that, and in their own way will move it forward. And then there's the components of keeping people working longer. What are the characteristics of an older worker that might be symbiotic with millennials and others? And we've done some very interesting work through the Global Coalition on Aging in identifying those and trying to put some metrics to that so that there isn't the assumption, which many corporations still have, of, okay, 55, you're out of here, and it's going to save me money because I don't no longer have to pay you. So, you know, in today's working environment, which is enormously flexible, and again, just yesterday, I'm sure during the course of the whole week, I think there's a lot of very interesting, innovative discussion around that. I mentioned caregiving. We think this is one of the more interesting developments, and in some ways, the dirty little secret. Let me put it to you this way. There are a growing number of roughly 48 to 60-year-old employees who are taking care of their parents. And the amount of time they're spending taking care of their parents is growing. Mom just had a fall, dad's Alzheimer's got a little worse, mom has to go to the dentist or the doctor. What am I going to do? And this is, in its essence, a business productivity issue. And therefore, we think that, like many other topics, out of self-interest, the competitive business organization will understand this and begin to adapt. The technology opportunities are huge. We had a little session with Google about a year ago. As many of you will know, glass has now sort of fallen by the wayside, but at the time, we had a very interesting discussion about using glass as an early prosthesis for early Alzheimer's. And it actually was beginning to work. So I did a post a couple days ago in America, and I'm sure here as well. One of our components of our year is the graduation period at colleges and universities. And I was not invited to give a commencement address, but I gave one anyway, which I wrote through the HuffPost. And my point was, dear graduates, you're 21, you're likely to live to 90 or 100, and God willing, healthier and more active than any generation in the past. When you think about that, you've got 60, 70 years ahead of you. What are you going to do and how are you going to manage that? Very different from the way I did it or prior generations. How are you going to think about education, training, skills, sabbaticals, work, life in this new longevity that you will have, and in the course of it, write the new social contract that we need, which will be relevant to 21st century demographics. And of course, the Beatles, when they wrote this in 1966, Will You Still Love Me When I'm 64, I mean, part of it was sort of like, who's going to be 64 anyway, and the stigma of that age. It's almost quaint now, but I think it's very interesting to conclude on that one. So thank you for your time, and I hope we have a robust discussion.